Tuesday night of revival. And on Tuesday night of revival, you can look around and tell who the sanctified people are. The kind of people who show up for revival service on Tuesday night. If you're here, it either means that you are sanctified or you are paid to be here. Joe Voigt. It is good to be here in what is, I understand, to be now the best place to live in the United States. Yeah. I grew up very near here behind Lowe's before there was Lowe's. And I went to high school down the road at Northeast years and years ago. I preached to this congregation when I was around 18, 19, 20 years old, back when this church was the Memorial Drive Church over on Memorial Drive. I would go over and preach occasionally to the smaller congregation there. I doubt any of you who were part of that group then, and you're still here, part of the church today, I doubt any of you still remember my preaching from all those years ago. If you do remember my preaching, and I doubt you do, but if you do, I'm sorry. I want you to know it is a tremendous blessing and honor to be here. Your pastor is one of my dearest friends in ministry. He's a partner in ministry. He's a brother. We're a part of a group that gets together at least monthly and visits and prays and share struggles and lift each other up to the Lord. And I am so grateful for the brotherhood that I get to share with Rich Cook. It's been a great week. I've been watching the services as you've been sharing them online, and I've been able to catch up and keep up. You've been hearing from some great preachers this week. I am Pat Harrington's son. Maybe you've heard. She led me to Christ 32 years ago on a Sunday night. She is an incredible, godly woman, and she is my hero, and I'm so grateful for her. And if I become half of the person who she thinks I am, then I'll be okay. I invite you to join me tonight in John chapter 2. Would you turn there to John chapter 2 with me? And hear these words. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," so they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw out some water and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water, though they knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside, and he said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here, John tells us, in Cana of Galilee, was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. It's the word of the Lord, church. Thanks be to God. It had to have been one of the biggest events of the year in that little town of Cana. Celebrations didn't get any bigger than weddings like this one. The whole town turned up, and people from neighboring towns. In that culture, a wedding celebration lasted a full week. The wedding ceremony itself, the reception, all of it rolled into one big week-long bash. The family probably put their finger on the most spacious home they could get, and they transformed it into a parting hall. Decorations floor to ceiling, tables butted together, piles of food, everybody dolled up and dressed in their best. The young couple dancing, eyes locked, grinning ear to ear, children playing, adults laughing, older folks lined against the wall, talking about the last wedding and the wedding before that and how all the weddings compare. Everything at this wedding was picture perfect, just like things are always picture perfect at weddings, right? Right? There does often seem to be something that happens, something that doesn't go quite right, a mishap, a fiasco, some type of a blunder. Very few weddings I know have everything go just as planned. Something usually happens. I married my wife 19 years ago. On our wedding day, the florist brought flower displays that had, unbeknownst to any of us, an ant colony living in them. They were taken downstairs to the reception area and they were placed on the tables with all of the food. And when we finished the wedding ceremony, we went downstairs for the reception only to find that the ants had gotten to the food before we could. I asked some of my friends to share their stories, and some of these stories are funny, and some of these are painful, and some of them, to be honest with you, are painful and funny. I heard stories about bridesmaids tumbling downstairs during their entrance and humiliating speeches at receptions. One person told me that at their wedding, before the ceremony started, that one of the ushers went up front to light all the candles as they do, and the usher inadvertently lit the unity candle as well. I've heard of flower girl meltdowns and a chocolate fountain that sprayed everywhere. A maid of honor who never showed up. In one wedding, the sound man played the wedding march too soon. He played the wedding march when the groom and the best man entered. One particular wedding that took place at a courthouse, the witnesses did not show. So the couple ran outside, found a couple of ladies on their smoke break, and pulled them into the courthouse to be their witnesses. I was actually at a wedding once when the groom fainted and they brought a chair up for him to finish the ceremony sitting. One of my friends told me of a wardrobe malfunction at a wedding where the father of the bride's pants fell down at the moment he was giving his daughter away. Now, one of my friends told me that at his wedding, the father of the groom, so the groom's father decided that he wanted to sing a song at the wedding, and so he sang a song, and the title of the song was, "I Loved Her First." A little bit awkward there. One couple that I know of, they hired a very difficult piano player. Piano players can be difficult. I know I'm married to one. The difficult piano player throughout the service. And then after the ceremony was over, the piano player gets up and goes straight to the reception area before anybody else gets there. She cuts the cake, serves herself, and starts eating it before the couple even gets to the reception area. Wow. There's a dear retired pastor and his wife in my church years ago. They are I can't say this enough, dear, wonderful, holiness, beautiful, retired, sweet pastor couple. Years ago, they got married on June the 14th. They went on their honeymoon. They returned, and they found out that the preacher wrote June 21st on the wedding certificate. So we like to say that this dear, sweet pastor couple lived in sin for a week. Bob Goff tells a great story about his wedding day. He and his buddies, it was their job to transport the wedding cake. 4 tiers, layers, pillars, all that, from a van into the church on an AV cart. And you know, this is going to go really well, right? So one of the wheels gets hung into the gravel and the thing turns, and you can just see it happening in slow motion as layers start to slide off and it all hits the ground. And Bob says the only thing we knew to do was to pick the layers up, to smooth over the gravel, to re-ice the cake, and then to take it on in and serve it up at our wedding. And that's exactly what they did. I asked your pastor and his wife, did any weird and crazy thing happen at your wedding? And Dana said, marrying Rich was the weird and crazy thing that happened at our wedding. No, she did not say that. She did not say that. Wedding mishaps, they often seem to happen. I've got stories. You've probably got some similar stories of your own. The mishap that happened at the wedding in Cana was that they ran out of wine. This was more than a minor inconvenience, because in those days, in that culture, this would have been a social disaster. You see, the wedding celebration lasted as long as the wine did. When the wine ran out, that put the brakes on the whole bash. A wedding without wine was unthinkable. It's not like there was a package store around the corner where somebody could run and get some more. No more wine means it's over. No more wine means everybody go home. No more wine brings shame and disgrace to the host family. No more wine was considered a curse for the couple who is beginning their life together on that day. The wine ran out. Not a small thing. Who knows how it ran out? Maybe it was poor planning. Maybe it was a miscalculation. I like to think that the guest list grew. You know how guest lists tend to grow? You know, it starts off with, we're just going to have a small private family ceremony. You know, that's how it starts out, right? And then, well, we should invite Mary, because Mary's practically family. She's such a close friend. Let's invite Mary. And, well, if you invite Mary, then you kind of need to invite her son, Jesus. And, well, if you invite Jesus, you pretty much need to invite those 12 guys that follow him around everywhere. And the guest list grew, and the guest list grew, and the guest list grew to the point that it was greater than the wine supply. And the wine ran out. Whatever the reason, however it ran out, it ran out. And so Mary knows that the wine is out, and she decides that she's going to go to Jesus and she's going to whisper in his ear, the wine is out. Now, the way I picture this playing out in my mind, it's not a statement of concern. It's not with any sense of anxiety. Oh no, the wine is out. I believe that when Mary goes to Jesus to share this with him, I believe she can hardly contain her excitement. Mary in this moment, I believe, is doing more than just passing along information that's needed. I believe that from Mary's perspective, this is a call to action, okay? Because Mary knows her son. Mary knows on some level what Jesus is capable of doing. And so when Mary goes and whispers in his ear, the wine is out, it's like she's whispering, this is your moment. It's time for you to quit playing Clark Kent. It's time for you to do your stuff, to show up and make something happen. Show them who you are. Do it right now. Mary is such a mother. She is such a mother who loves and believes in her son. She is such a mother who publicly loves and believes in her son. Like to an embarrassing degree, she loves and believes in her son. And she's sticking her nose in and she's offering up her son's services. And for the record, I want you to know I have no experience with a mother like that. Did I mention that I'm Pat Harrington's son? Jesus says, woman, I don't recommend that, teens, don't recommend it. Jesus says, woman, it's not my time. In other words, here's another Greek translation. Quit embarrassing me, Mom. Okay, quit embarrassing me, Mom. But it's like Mary doesn't even hear him. Because when her mind is set because she's a mother. And so Mary turns to the servants and she says, do whatever he tells you to do. And folks, I don't want you to miss something that's happening in this story. Something that's quite easy to miss in this story that I think is pretty important. That our vantage point that John gives us in John chapter 2, what we're seeing unfold, what we get to see in this story is really happening behind the scenes. What we're privy to, the part of the story that we're getting, it's not playing out on the dance floor, at the head table, out where the people are, the VIPs, the people on the guest list, the people who are partying it up at this wedding. It's not happening out in front of all the guests. But the scene that John is letting us in on is playing out at the servant's workstation, in the back, near the kitchen, door swinging, dishes clanking, towels tucked into belts. Mary and Jesus in this story are not rubbing elbows with the host and the guests. They are more tuned in to the servants than they are the party. The only way that Mary could know that the wine ran out was if she was close to the servants. All the people out there on the dance floor, all the people out at the tables, they're oblivious to the fiasco that's taken place. As far as they know, the wine is flowing freely. But Mary and Jesus, they know. Because when Mary and Jesus go to this social occasion, they sought out the people who were the least. They spent time with the help. This is one more example of Jesus constantly being with those who are on the outside. Well, you know how the story goes. Mary persists. Jesus caves. He does what his mama says. There are 6 stone jars nearby. 6 stone jars, we're told. Now, the thing about these jars, they're not wine jars. They're not meant to contain wine. And they're not all-purpose jars that you could just put whatever in. But we are told that these jars have a singular purpose to them. These jars are for ceremonial washing. Not washing up for dinner washing, but religious washing, purification washing, being a good Jew washing. That's what these jars are for. That's the purpose of these jars. These jars, they represent the Jewish religion. They represent all of their ways. They represent the Jewish practices. They represent Jewish holiness, Jewish purification, represent everything that their religion is about. And at this point of the story, those jars are empty. Fill them with water, Jesus says. Fill them full, not mostly full, not almost to the top full, not fill it enough so it won't spill when you move it full, but fill it sloshing over the side of the jar full. And they do. They fill the jars full, and then Jesus gives instructions, draw some out and give it to the master. Now, folks, I want you to imagine with me for just a moment being that servant. Okay? You've got this Jewish jar, this ceremonial jar. It's been filled all the way to the top with water. You're supposed to get it to the master of the banquet, and you're supposed to serve him some of that water when he thinks what he is getting is going to be wine. It takes a lot of nerve to be the person who has to be charged with that task. In those days, it was customary to serve the best wine first, and you save the cheap stuff for later on in the celebration. And it's simple, the reason why, because after people have had a few drinks, they can't tell the difference between the good stuff and the cheap stuff. You see, I find you have to explain this to Nazarenes. And And so the servant, he serves the master drinks, and it's wine, but not only is this wine, but now it's good wine. It is wine that is better than the wine they had at the beginning of the wedding celebration. The master is impressed, the party keeps on going, and this adds a boost to the celebration. This celebration that was about to come to a crashing halt has now been elevated to a new level and given new life, and it just keeps on going. And John tells us that this was Jesus' first miracle. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, it makes sense. This is a good starter miracle. If you're going to do miracles, this is a good one to start with. This is a low-pressure first miracle. This is kind of like a warm-up miracle, just to make sure that you've got the right stuff. If you're Jesus, you don't want to start by healing a paralytic or raising up the dead. You work toward raising the dead, right? You don't start there. Start small, turn some water into some wine. That's a good first step. But what's going on in this story is more than just a warm-up miracle. What's happening in this story is more than Jesus just getting his feet wet. What's happening in this story is certainly more than a party trick. And even though this story is very appropriate to read at weddings, and I believe that Jesus affirms the covenant celebration ceremony of weddings, even though I believe that, I still believe that what's happening in this story is still more than just Jesus affirming weddings. Verse 11, John tells us this was a sign. It's a sign. I think some of us get confused about what signs are. Sometimes we think signs are like proofs. And we'll say, God, give me a sign. I want a sign. And so we ask for a sign, or we say, well, is that a sign? And we think of signs like they're proofs. Signs aren't proofs. Signs are pointers. You know this. You drive down the interstate, you see signs that point you different ways. You drive down Wilma Rudolph Boulevard, you're bombarded with all the signs. And even walking through your church building, there's signs. Restroom this way, nursery that way. Signs. They're not proofs, they're pointers. They're meant to point you in a certain direction. So when John lets us know that what happens in this story is more than a proof, it's a pointer, it's a sign, it's meant to point us to something. So what in the world could a story like this be pointing us to? Well, right off the bat, we have a clue. When John begins the story, he says, this happened on the third day. Which begs the question, the third day of what? It's not the third day of the week-long wedding, because the wedding began on the third day. John doesn't tell us. We're kind of left hanging at that moment. On the third day of what? Why does John say third day? Why does it matter that it was the third day? And the third day of what? We're not given that context. Those of us who've been around the gospel a while, we know what third day means. Third day means empty tomb. Third day means resurrection life. Third day means victory over the powers of death. And so when John says third day, it's a hint. He's hitting us over the head with us, letting us know this is a sign, this story is a sign that is pointing to that day, the day of resurrection. And so he gives us that information. He gives us that to let us know that what is happening inside of those jars, that transformation that is taking place inside of those jars, is the same type of transformation that will take place inside of that tomb. It's a sign. It's pointing us. This story is also a sign that points us similarly to something else. Because one day the Bible says there's going to be a wedding. Jesus, the groom, will come back for his bride, the church. And there will be a wedding celebration like none other. There's going to be a consummation. There's going to be the marriage supper of the Lamb. There's going to be a big grand wedding party. And when we get to that celebration, there's going to be no stoppage to the celebration. No running out of food or drink. It's going to go on for eternity. This story points us forward to that day, to that future, to that reality. Most people, the way that we recall this story, if I were to ask most of you just to recall the events of this story in your mind and to retell the story, you would hit the high points and you would tell the parts that you remember. And what most people would say is that Jesus took the water and he turned it into wine. But there's something that we miss. There's something that if we're not careful, we overlook. Those jars did not go from water to wine. Those jars went from empty to water to wine. From empty to water. Those ceremonial jars, those Jewish jars, they went from empty to water to wine. These jars that represented their religion, their ways, their purification, their holiness, their practices, their system, everything that they had, they were empty to begin with. So Jesus is saying something here. Jesus is making a pronouncement in this story. You could even go so far to say that Jesus is making a judgment in this story. Jesus is saying, your ways are empty. Your religion is hollow, void of life, missing substance, empty, dry, cracked, broken. It looks like there's something on the outside. From all appearances, everything looks great. You look at those jars, you think that represents our Jewish way of being, and everything looks fine on the outside, but inside, empty. In the Old Testament, the Jewish people were made to be a kingdom of light. They were made to be this missionary people for the rest of the world. The Jewish people in the Old Testament were meant to be this nation among the nations, set apart to draw all nations and all people unto their God, to point others to their God. I mean, this is the story of Abraham, right? When God called Abraham, he says, I'm going to bless you, but I'm not just going to bless you for your sake so that you can be blessed and feel blessed and be glad about the fact that you are blessed. I'm not just blessing you for your sake, but I'm blessing you so that all peoples, all nations, everyone will be blessed through you. So the story of the Old Testament is the story of a God who raises up his people, the Jewish people, to be his holy people in the world, to be his missional people in the world. And through this group of people, God is reaching out to redeem, to bring back all of creation, to bring back the rest of the world. The only problem is, and you know the story as well as I do, the Jewish people, they began to curve inward. We want back to Egypt. We want meat. We want a king. We. And they devolved into a play it safe, look out for us, just like everybody else. Culture of personal comfort. And part of their sickness was their belief that they were well. They were empty, void of the heart of God, of care for the poor, of issues of justice, embracing needy and the lost. And they had curved inward. They'd become internal. There was no sense of mission. They were empty of life. So Jesus looks around for something to put the wine in, right? And it's not just, okay, here's something that's available that we can put the wine in. In Jesus' mind, it's aha. The thing that represents your entire religion and all of your ways, it is empty and I am going to fill it. So here's what I'm going to do with your old, hollow, empty system. I'm going to do something new. I have come to fill what was empty. I have come to bring change. I have come to bring real transformation. I have come to bring meaning and life to all of your old ways. I have come to bring change in you that is worth celebrating. What I am doing inside of those empty jars is what I want to do with your entire empty religion. I am filling it. I am filling it with a new wine, with the kingdom of myself. And folks, if you're in any doubt about that, just look at the very next story. Because the very next story, the story after this one, is when Jesus goes in and clears the temple, right? As he just continues on this same theme of, okay, your ways are messed up, it's empty, it's hollow, it's void of life. In the New Testament, the work that God is up to is the same work that God is up to in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, God is raising up a people to be his holy people in the world, to be his missional people in the world, to be a kingdom of light. He's raising up a people to be his missionary people, to live among the nations, to point all people to our God. In the New Testament, the storyline's really simple. I tell folks in my church, the storyline's simple. And the storyline for the Old Testament is the same storyline for the New Testament. God's raising up a group of people, the Jews in the Old Testament, to be his holy missional people in the world. And in the New Testament, he's doing the very same work. He's raising up a group of people to be his holy missional people in the world. We call it church. This is what the church is for. I'm convinced that the church today can get by without Jesus. The church doesn't need Jesus to do most of what the church does today. A church without Jesus can keep on being busy. A church without Jesus can keep filling the calendar. A church without Jesus can keep on going with the potluck dinners and the Christmas pageants, and we can keep doing stuff for the kids to keep them entertained and off the streets. A church without Jesus is capable of doing some good deeds. A church without Jesus can get in groups of people like us who we like. A church without Jesus can sing some songs that we like and pay our budgets and draw a crowd. And a church without Jesus is even actually capable of maybe even growing. We don't need Jesus to do all that stuff. We got our tricks. A church without Jesus is one that is void of the heart of God, that is unconcerned with the people who concern God's heart, the poor, the needy, the lost, the broken. A church without Jesus is curved in internally, does not have a sense of mission. A church without Jesus might look good and fine and well on the outside, just like those jars. But on the inside, bone dry, empty. George Stroop says that this is the kind of church where Jesus fades into the background like a fondly remembered dead uncle. You know what I would say? I would even actually say that you can really make the case that the church operates more smoothly without Jesus. I didn't know if you know this, but Jesus has a way of disturbing things. Jesus has a way of messing with us. Jesus rearranges schedules, and Jesus messes with your money. Jesus doesn't know that he's not supposed to do that. He messes with your money. He knocks you off your high horse. He upsets your priorities. He drags you outside of your comfort zone. Sometimes he changes your vocation. He takes all of your carefully laid plans and messes with them. It's actually, you can say, easier to operate a church without Jesus. It's more efficient to operate a church without Jesus. It's less of a headache if you try to operate your church without Jesus. You can be more financially stable if you operate your church without Jesus. Then we have to start to ask why we even have a church. And if we're not careful, we will be empty of Christ, where we practice a form of religion, but we're void of life. We might look good on the outside, but on the inside, we're empty. Now, you all know that I'm not talking about you, right? I'm talking about the people I pastor back in Waverly. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about them, right? This isn't being recorded, is it? Okay. Those are good people in Waverly. You know that passage in the book of Revelation where Jesus says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." That's like a favorite. That's like a staple witnessing verse. You've seen it on tracts and in face-to-face conversations, and maybe you've heard it in evangelistic messages, that the message is that Jesus is talking to those people out there, those sinners out there, and Jesus is saying to those people out there, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. Would you sinners let me into your life out there?" And the problem with that is that's not the context of what's happening, because actually in the book of Revelation, those words are being spoken to the church in Laodicea. So here's the mental image you should have of Jesus standing outside of the church saying, hey, church, would y'all let me in? The church is empty of Christ. And Jesus has a pronouncement at this point, and his pronouncement is this: I want to take your empty religion and I want to fill it with myself. Not mostly full, not almost to the top full, but sloshing over and spilling out full. Jesus says, I came that you would have life, and that you would have life to the very fullest. Before he seeks to bring about any change to those sinners out there, he seeks first and foremost to bring change into us sinners in here. And he came to bring fundamental change. What happened in those jars was fundamental change. And for us, for the church, he's come to be the one who brings fundamental change, in order for us to be agents and instruments and channels of his grace to the world. So what's the point if we're not captured by the heart of God? What's the point of being here and doing what we do if our lives are not filled with the new wine of the kingdom of Christ? If we aren't so consumed with Christ that he's coming out of us and filling our world and moving toward the lost and the needy and the broken around us, what's the point of who we are and what we're doing if we're not consumed with God's mission in the world, passionate about his work in the world, filled with his presence, before we can begin to deal with an empty world out there? We need to deal with the empty we have in here. As we offer our empty selves up, our empty ways, our empty religion to our Lord, and we say, oh God, would you once again fill us? Would you fill me? Would you fill the church? Would you fill these people with your very self? Would you stand with me this evening? Folks, I believe this is the point where revival begins. And this is the point where discipleship begins. This, what we're talking about tonight, this is the point where mission begins. This is the point where community engagement begins. This is the point where worship begins. This is the point where the holy life begins. When the people of God come before God and cry out to Him and acknowledge, we are not enough. We look good on the outside. We might look the part, but we know the truth about ourselves. On the inside, we are so very empty and void of life, and we need you. We need the new wine of the kingdom of Christ to continually come into us and fill us, so that we won't be the same old people, so that we won't be the same old church, so that we won't live the same old ways. Church, the stakes are pretty high when I think about it. So much depends on, is my life filled with the new wine of the kingdom of Christ? I got 3 kids at home. I almost said little kids. They're not so little anymore. Their growth, their development, their discipleship all hinges on whether or not their daddy is filled with the new wine of the kingdom of Christ. And I can't settle for saying, yeah, I got saved once upon a time, so I'm good. But I need to continually seek Him. I need to continually confess, I'm empty, Lord. I need you. Board members, leaders, Sunday school teachers, ministry leaders of your church. A lot is riding in your areas of ministry and the things that you do on whether or not your life is filled with the new wine of the kingdom of Christ. He has come to you tonight. He has come to you tonight to fill Him with His very self. And so as we move into singing this song and making this song our prayer that we cry out to our God tonight, I want to invite you, if you'd like to come and if you'd like to fall down in the presence of your Lord at these altars. I tell my folks at my church, I say this often because I know that I need to. Some of your knees don't work the way they used to because you tell me that. My knees don't work the way I used to, and I wish I could kneel. I hear that a lot. And so I say, come and stand. Come and stand. If the Lord's talking to you tonight and saying, not only is your spiritual life, your walk with the Lord, your family, your church, your witness, your discipleship, the discipleship of others, it all hinges on whether or not you are continually seeking Him to fill you with the new wine of His kingdom. As we cry out these words to our God, the altar's open. Would you come and meet Him here tonight?